Myopic amplifier voicing. There's a mouthful for you. This question comes from Chris in Columbus, Ohio. Hi, Paul. When you're voicing your amplifiers using your IRS-5 reference speakers, how do you take into account that most people will not be listening to the amp on the same speakers? I'd assume that the woofer tower amps color any of the bass range coming out of your amp, so it seems like you would only be able to use the speakers to voice the mid to high ranges. How do you make sure your amps sound good on normal-sized passive speakers? I ask this because I've noticed that amplifiers designed after subwoofer use became common seem to be lacking a solid low end. So much so that my 30 watt per channel 1970 Sony receiver produces a much more solid sound than some new, expensive, well-reviewed amps from highly regarded companies. Not yours. I haven't tried out PS Audios yet. I hope we qualify. Anyway, Chris, the only explanation I can come up with for this is that the amp designers assume that people will be using a powered sub, gloss over how their low end sounds through a fully passive speaker system. Well, you know, there's some... I'm not going to argue with you on that because there's some truth to it, but not the truth that you think. So let's start with how we voice music. And we'll also start with one of the points you brought up, Chris, which is when we voice our equipment on speakers with giant woofer towers, how is it that we know the bass is going to be correct on a passive system, right? Because if you're on a passive system, you don't have these big woofer towers, you know, with like 8,000 watts on it, do you? You might not even have a subwoofer. No, you don't. So how do we determine whether the bass is good or bad? That's a great question. These wings, these front mid-range tweeters, they go down to 100 hertz. They're flat to 100 hertz. So what does that mean? Well, it means that, and when I say that they start, they're flat to 100 hertz and then they start rolling off, they're going down below what most passive speakers even are capable of doing flat, right? So most speakers can go down to maybe 60 hertz, not flat, that's where they're rolling off. And these are rolled off too. But here's the thing. When you have a bass player playing, you know, boom, 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 or whatever you have playing, a keyboard or whatever, you hear this bass note that seems like it's all coming out of the subwoofer. But if you were to turn off these, right? If you turn these off and only play the subwoofer, what do you think you get? That's what you get. This. There is no character to the bass whatsoever. And the character to bass comes from here, from the mid-ranges, and because they cover down so low. So we can tell instantly whether a plucked bass is going to sound good or bad. We can even tell with the subwoofers off qualities of bass, levels of bass. So that's pretty easy. So let's get that out of the way. Secondly, these aren't the only speakers we use. We have other speakers, but we don't need to go there. So secondly, when we are voicing products, we don't expect that people have anything. So it's not as if we would say, well, I'm thinking that the average person who's going to buy our electronics has X, Y, or Z, and they all have subwoofers, or they all don't have subwoofers. We have never thought like that, don't think like that. What we do is we voice it on this reference system and our other reference systems to sound as musical, natural, and correct as possible. With still being flat, we go for the best bottom end, the best top end, and we assume that that is a standard. And that standard is what we build our products to. Now, When you go to buy a pair of speakers or you buy a piece of our electronics, we don't know what you're going to hook it up to. So we assume that you've taken this reference and you're going to do the best you can with it. If it doesn't match what you think, here's what, here's what we know. We know that you need to fix something else in your system because this is right. This is correct to music. It's the thing that we have worked on for 40 years. We make it not so it has, great bass for a system. We make it so it has the appropriate bass for an instrument or for a voice. It's right, it's natural. And we play tons of acoustic music here because of that. We want a guitar to sound like a guitar, a bass to sound like a bass. So that's the nature of how we voice, how it kind of all works, and why we don't pay attention to whether you have a subwoofer or not. And when people call up here and they say, you always talk about this Boss Skaggs piece, thanks to you. And when the keyboardist is going down, there's notes that this system picks up that many systems don't. That's just the way it is. And I know the note's there, and I guarantee you the keyboardist knows it's there because he hit it, right? So if your system isn't picking it up, then you need to work on your system. So I hope that answered your question. It was a fairly involved one, and I probably didn't give it proper justice, but maybe we'll hit that again. So thanks for the question. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.